2026 Twins continue to be a team defined by streaks over this last week, streaky health, streaky play, and another closer added to the streak of new saves in Minnesota. We have a lot to talk about this week on the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast, so we are going to dive right in. And Matt, how are you feeling about the Twins?
About the same as I have the last couple weeks. We're seeing exactly what this team is, and it's probably not very good. It's at times interesting, but overall, it's been a tough team to watch. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, we really just kind of continue to see exactly what we expected out of the Twins. We can't really complain about taking a series out of Cleveland, but even within taking 2 out of 3 in Cleveland, we had to see so much go right to overcome the amount of wrong that was going on that it's still tough to feel great about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to feel good about a win when they had 2 hits on Saturday. Both of them were from Byron Buxton, and it was their paper mache bullpen that somehow won them a game. You just know that that's not going to be a sustainable method of winning, and it's nice to get that one win, but man, it's not pretty. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I was just so confused when I saw Luis Garcia warming up for the eighth because I'm like, this is a 1-run game, and we're really going to Luis Garcia again. And then tonight when I saw Yendry Gomez coming in to save the ninth, I'm like, hold on, hold on. I had to go back to like the Twins timeline on Twitter to figure out when we just gotten this guy because like I'd seen the tweet, I knew we had picked him up, but I did not know that he was going to be getting put into a save situation a day after he became a Twin like that.
Oh yeah, I mean it really just highlights how bad this bullpen is because the Twins picked up Yoendry Gomez in a minor trade with the Rays after they DFA'd him. The Rays are probably the worst team in the AL East, and then the Twins signed Luis Garcia after the Mets cut him, and the Mets are like one of the worst teams in the National League right now, super disappointing. And these are guys that are big upgrades and immediately being thrust into high leverage roles. Each of them have gotten both a hold and a save in the last 2 days. And right before the show, Eric, I was talking to you, and I mentioned that I had a fun stat for you. And it's actually not a whole lot of fun, but it is about one of these two guys. So Luis Garcia, since signing with the Twins, has appeared in 7 games. In those 7 games, he's thrown, I think, 6 2/3 innings. Let me double check. He's thrown 5 2/3 innings. Apologies. He has yet to record a strikeout.
I I don't know that I did not know that it was that bad. I think after his second or third outing, I was also starting to catch on to this trend. I just love what this represents for the bullpen that, as you pointed out last week, is like has to be approaching all-time worsts in terms of strikeouts per nine, strikeout to walk ratio, pretty much anything that has to do with striking out hitters. I could not picture a more reasonable and representative late inning high leverage reliever for this Twins team right now than Luis Garcia.
Luis Garcia is a hard throwing pitcher, but he's 39, and he has yet to even record a strikeout per inning in the big league since 2022. Coincidentally, he's not had an ERA. Well, last year is better, but 3 out of the last 4 years, he's not had an ERA below 4. And I think that coincides perfectly with his downtick in strikeouts.
Okay, fun little exercise here at the start though. Is he even the first cut from this bullpen when we get anybody back? Because I don't think so right now.
Man, flip a coin, throw a dart, whoever you hit, it's fine to get rid of. Like, there's no one that's good. Like, currently, Roster Resource has a 3-person committee as the Twins' quote unquote closer, and it is Justin Topa, Eric Orzy, and Taylor Rogers. Justin Topa has a 7.88 ERA with a 2.5% K minus walk rate. Atrocious. He he's only getting 13% strikeouts and almost 11% walk rate. Like, he is so bad. And he's
I would not be shocked to see that at some point flip so that he just straight up is walking more guys and he's striking out. That's how bad it has looked so far.
Speaking of walking more guys than you strike out, the Twins finally optioned Cody Funderburk, and I don't think he was the worst reliever in this bullpen.
I don't either, but I did want to talk about that because A kind of caught me off guard. We've been talking about the possibility of a lot when Kendry Rojas first came up. I don't think either of us thought it was unreasonable to believe that Funderburk would just kind of stay down. So, do you think that this is the Twins waving a more long term white flag, or are we just seeing Rojas up because we were in a pinch with Taj Bradley getting hurt and they needed a start, quote unquote, to get covered, and he's going to head right back down?
I don't know. It's interesting because I think theoretically the Twins probably knew that Taj Bradley was hurt before, well, obviously before putting him on the injured list, but probably before Zebby Matthews threw, what was that, on Friday night? And so, if they had plans for Zebby to rejoin the major league rotation, I would have assumed they would have held him out of that start, had him start today, being Sunday, in place of Taj Bradley. They didn't do that. It left them in a pinch. That's why they called up Kendry Rojas. But I think, maybe Kendry Rojas is just here to stay, and the Twins just have him kind of be in a piggyback starter role for a little bit. Also of note, I saw that the next time Prelip's spot in the rotation comes up, the Twins are currently marked as to be determined for probable starter. And so the thought is they're going to shift the rotation around a little bit more, get Prelip an extra day or two off. So, I mean, right now this Twins rotation has two healthy full-time starters that you feel decent about, and one of them's the 88-mile-an-hour Bailey Ober, and the other one's Joe Ryan, who left with an injury before his most recent start. So the rotation's looking pretty haggard right now.
All right. I do have a few things to address there. Number one, we can very easily debate whether we think it's going to sustain, but after rough like 2 or 3 starts, Bailey Ober has legitimately turned around his season. He has been a positive contributing pitcher in his last few starts. And like I said, I don't really want to think about whether or not that change is real because I just know it's not. We watch the games and it doesn't really feel any different. He's just stranding a lot more runners, which I can't really believe in him doing with his lack of strikeout stuff. But he does deserve some flowers. Second of all, I was really surprised to see that they ended up having Travis Adams throw, what was it, like I think 1 1/3 today. And I get that part of that is just because he struggled and he was blowing what was an active lead, and we needed to try to preserve that. But I really would have thought with him coming up in place of Taj Bradley that they were going to try to stretch him out similarly to how they did Rojas and maybe piggyback 2 bullpen games out of this rotation.
Yeah, I mean, part of that too is Travis Adams hasn't been used as a starter in the minors and was coming off injury, so he's just not built up at all. And I think they probably couldn't have pushed him past more than like 2 innings. But yeah, I mean, like you said, he looked pretty rough today. The command was shaky, but I don't know. I kind of am to the point with this whole pitching staff where it's like I don't even know, man. Like I can't make heads or tails of this. I can't decipher what they're gonna do next because it's just a bunch of guys that A, I don't think are very good, and B, we don't really know what their role is. Like, there's not any set hierarchy in the bullpen. You can never say, oh, it's the 6th inning, we have a lead. Here's probably, our pitching game plan of the bullpen. Because who knows? Because it's just 8 guys who are like not good enough to be a real big league reliever, let alone a high leverage reliever. So it's just like throwing darts. We'll see if this guy's good today. That dude hasn't pitched in a while. Throw him in there. So that's just confusing. And then now with all these rotation injuries, it's like, as I said, we have Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober. And then behind that, like, we have Sim, who I guess is, a full time starter, but he's averaging less than 5 innings per start. He's been truly abysmal, ERA near 7. Another guy who is barely striking out more guys than he walks, 10.6% strikeout rate to an 8.9% walk rate. So he's been by far the Twins' worst starting pitcher. He's the only one behind Ryan and Ober, who stretched out at all. And then it's guys like Rojas and Prelip, and even those guys need to be kind of, you know, treated carefully and aren't stretched out to a full starter's workload. And so this whole team is just very confusing. There's not a lot of set parts, and there's not a lot of very good parts. And so I'm just very, very confused about the pitching plan and don't know what they're going to do for the next few weeks.
Yeah, and it maybe becomes a little bit easier to deal with later into the season because you might be seeing some more starting pitcher veterans get shed. But as of right now, you mentioned how we're putting a lot of our stock into guys like Rojas and Prelip, who A aren't stretched out, but B likely just will not throw a full season because they aren't that seasoned yet. They haven't built up to that many innings. So if we're already struggling and we're dedicating 2/5 of this rotation to Rojas and Prelip, what are we going to be doing at the end of the year to fill all of these starts? I mean, let alone we have to continue to see Simeon Woods Richardson for the entire year. We're probably going to see Bailey Ober the entire year. Realistically, if we're this bad at the deadline, they're going to trade Joe Ryan. That's just going to add another vacancy to the rotation. It it is baffling, I think, to have this much of a struggle with depth when we were touting it as such a strength and something we probably thought they should have traded away from this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing as too much starting pitching depth. We've seen that year in and year out with the Twins. Anytime you think they have a good rotation, there's always going to be injuries. But for a team that was very much relying on the starting rotation to be not only good and serviceable, but potentially top 10 in the league to push towards a playoff spot, it's not turned out that way, and it's quickly descending into just absolute chaos. And I mean, the updates from the pitching side aren't the greatest. I mean, we talked last week about Joe Ryan and his potential injury. Obviously, since then, we've learned that Joe Ryan is healthy. His MRI came back clean. He made his scheduled start on Saturday. Velo looked good. He was effective against the Guardians. We have less concerns about Joe Ryan now. But outside of that, I mean, David Festa had another setback. He doesn't look like he's probably even going to pitch in the first half. And so, assuming he comes back after the All Star break, it'll have been a full year since he's pitched in the big leagues. Similarly, we had Mick Abel. He started to throw off a mound again. He experienced soreness in another part of his arm, now in his tricep. The Twins are saying, it's a pretty minor thing, but they gave him a cortisone shot, and you don't usually give cortisone shots for like super minor. He'll be fine in a few days. So it's getting really concerning, and I'm not sure there's a whole lot of help on the horizon. And quite honestly, the Twins need there to be, because it's not just the rotation. It's the fact that we need a surplus of arms in the rotation to build up what is truly one of the worst bullpens I've ever seen.
So I was debating this a little bit in my head earlier while we were talking about the bullpen. Do you think there's a world where LaTroy Hawkins, freshly hired first year as the bullpen coach for the Twins, just walks away after the season, says, "I'm sorry, guys, like this entire experience has been so horrible. If I just can't do it," and walks away from a job in the MLB, not unsimilar to how Derek Falvey left?
Okay, well, I think, like, especially for a major league coach, they're not as tied to the results. Like a lot of these guys, especially the former players, are here just because they love a clubhouse environment. They love working with players. And so things might be going poorly, but it's still a very sought after job. So I think a guy like LaTroy Hawkins or Grady Sizemore isn't going to go, man, this season was terrible. I can't deal with it. Like, I got to leave. I think they're more so saying, man, I'm getting a chance to hang around the big leagues, be with the guys, travel with the team. And yeah, things aren't going as well, but I'm still getting a chance to coach in the big leagues, which is pretty cool. I thought you were going to ask, is there a chance that LaTroy Hawkins at like 50 something could get a spot in this Twins bullpen? And I would say never, because the Twins have guys in their bullpen who are not that much younger than LaTroy Hawkins and are way worse pitchers than Hawkins was.
we were very seriously considering Andrew Chafin in our bullpen for a large portion of spring training. And I am confident that if he'd been training all offseason to build himself up as well, that LaTroy Hawkins could pitch at or above Andrew Chafin's level this year.
Yeah, in spring training, we were talking about how Chafin and Liam Hendriks were the Twins' two big, bullpen signings for the offseason. Well, Chafin left or got out of the Twins deal. I forget if the Twins released him or if he opted out, whatever. Got out of the Twins deal, signed with the Reds on a minor league deal, pitched a little bit in AAA, and then got released or opted out of that contract. He's now a free agent. And Liam Hendriks, after the Twins released him, just retired. He's not even trying to play baseball. He's like, man, the Twins cut me. It's probably the end of the line here. And I mean, that's the right response because the Twins cut bait on Liam Hendriks and then have gone on to have a bullpen that is 29th in baseball in ERA, 28th in whip, 25th in walks per nine, 29th in strikeouts per nine, dead last in hits per nine, and they kind of keep the ball in the yard at only 15th in the league.
Yeah, I mean, it says so much about both those guys that the Twins bullpen is as bad as we expected, and the Twins still chose to walk away from both of them without seeing a single pitch in the regular season. I'm going to steer this a little bit away, but I want to get back to this before we finish wrapping the Guardian series that just happened. This is what I saw on Twitter today that completely blew my mind. And I haven't fact checked this, but it came from the Twins Daily account, the guy who runs that apparently our win yesterday in Cleveland is the first time that the Twins have won in Cleveland since 2019 when Max Kepler hit 3 home runs off of Trevor Bauer. I that feels like it has to be false because you're telling me that would mean the Twins were on a losing streak of what, at least 50 games plus at Cleveland entering that game, but supposedly that's accurate.
Yeah. Here's another one that was on the broadcast today. And the Twins lost 27 one-run games against the Guardians. They're 7-20, which it makes sense. I mean, anecdotally, I've seen a lot of close games that the Twins lose to the Guardians.
I was about to say that record feels a little too friendly to the Twins. I just feel like the Twins Guardians matchups, those one-run games, are just like what define Guardians baseball to me, and all the most frustrating ways to be a fan against it.
Yeah, I mean, that does feel like I feel like I've seen the same script play out where the Twins will get up to a 2-run, 3-run lead early on, and that's the seventh inning. Griffin Jacks comes in, gives up a bloop single to Brian Rocchio, and then Kyle Manzardo walks, and then John Kenzie Noel hits a 3-run bomb, and the Twins are now losing. And then they just bring in Gaddis, Smith, and Clase, and it's game over. Well, no longer do we worry about Clase, but
that definitely does have to be the main part about it is they have the shutdown bullpen that we don't to make all those games count where they know they really only need to squeeze one run across. But as you mentioned in that string of players too, it's always just the most random role player that is dicing up the Twins. Like they, at the very least, they always walk Jose Ramirez. I feel like you're never seeing him play late game because he's always just running the base paths. But it's just always the most random guys that are constantly killing the Twins, it feels like.
yeah, I will say after the Twins took this 3-game series from the Guardians are still leading the division, but they are 500. They're the only non-losing team in the AL Central after a quarter of the season, mind you. The Twins are at dead last in the division at 18-23, but they're only 2.5 games out of the lead in the Central. And I think it's even less for the wild card, which shows you how bad the American League is. And the Twins, for how bad they've played and how underwhelmed we've been with the team, they still have a 21.5% chance of making the playoffs, which is around the same as entering the season. So, I mean, there's a chance, but it's going to take a lot going right on the pitching side. And that's before we even get into the hitters. And I'll be honest, I'm not that much more confident in the position players for this team.
I don't know about that, mainly because I feel like the production we've been getting so far in this season really has come from the guys that we absolutely did not expect to be giving us production outside of Byron Buxton, who just continues to be a literal god amongst men in Minnesota. It's been Trevor Larnick and Austin Martin. It's been Brooks Lee recently. He has been on a heater, at least in Brooks Lee terms, to the point where I'm really not that worried about him again for now. But it's been these guys that we largely expected to play platoon, non everyday roles that have really been pushing us through right now. And that's why I have more faith in the offense to turn around, because I just kind of have to believe that Keishel's going to get it right eventually, and Ryan Jeffers is going to heat back up, and Matt Wallner is going to stop getting benched against right handed starters, and the Twins can at least maintain this offensive output even if they don't really ever get better.
Okay, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here because yes, the production has come from unlikely sources, but that production's not all that sustainable. And I will say, I do think guys like Luke Keeschel are going to bounce back. But I mean, overall, I think this Twins offense has gotten pretty lucky to put together the production they have. They're ninth in baseball in runs scored, and I don't think you can look at this lineup top to bottom and say that's a top 10 offense in baseball for sure. And yeah, Ryan Jeffers has been great so far this year. 159 WRC plus. Buxton's hit 13 bombs. Those two have led the charge. Trevor Larnach, give him credit. He's walking a lot. He's cut his strikeout rate again. He's actually been a positive defender in the outfield. He's been great. I don't know that I trust it, but so far early returns are great. Similarly, Austin Martin. I mean, a couple weeks ago, we yelled at each other for a solid 10 minutes about Austin Martin. He's been very good, but he's still not slugging. I don't think he's going to put up anything near a 153 WRC plus rest of season, but he's been a pleasant surprise. A guy that you mentioned as a big factor in this offense so far has been Brooks Lee with a 106 WRC plus. However, the rest of season projections for him are all between 83 and 94. And so it's definitely going to come back down to earth. I'll say his weighted on base average right now, which takes into account, swing decisions and then also your quality of contact. You've weighted on base average and then expected. The expected is what we really care about. Even though they're both descriptive stats, it gives you an idea of, the player's true talent versus just what the results of the balls in play are. Brooks Lee has a 329 weighted on base average, which is good, especially for an up the middle defender. His expected numbers 269, which is unplayably bad. And that compares to 282 in his rookie year and 289 last year, where he put up weighted runs created pluses of 61 and 81. And so I do think he's taken a bit of a step forward. There's also been a lot of luck involved. And I definitely don't think he's suddenly figured it out.
Yeah, I feel like from a pure eye test perspective on what I've been seeing out of Brooks Lee recently, to me the big thing is he just seems to be elevating the ball a bit more. A lot of these hard ground balls getting smashed into the dirt, stuff he has no chance of beating out or making a productive play, has at the very least been getting off the ground enough where you do have to put the defenses on their heels a little bit, make them make clean plays, and just a lot of solid line drive singles that he's been spraying around the field. And that's why I'm just not super convinced that it's going to maintain, because like you said, there's been a lot of batted ball luck in terms of these still fairly softly hit grounders. I mean, plays that are makeable in the everyday MLB getting through, and him just historically never elevating at that level. But I do think that has always kind of been the vision for what a successful Brooks Lee would look like at the MLB level.
Yeah, and his ground ball rate is down from last year about 5%, but still, I mean, he's not a guy who's hitting the ball hard. He's a 17th percentile bat speed. His average exit velocity is making the most of that bat speed. He's in the 35th percentile. As you mentioned, though, kind of spraying the ball around, it's more so that he's gone from truly terrible to more middle of the pack. He has a 47th percentile launch angle sweet spot. So where he's hitting the ball in its ideal launch angles is about league average. He's not swinging and missing a whole lot. The strikeout rate's decent. He's still not walking. The defense at shortstop remains a big problem, and I don't think he's long for the shortstop world. But he's been far from our biggest issue. But I definitely don't think the next competitive Twins team has Brooks Lee as an everyday starter.
I don't necessarily disagree. And I think where I really lock in on more is I have larger fish to fry on this roster. Where if he can just continue to do this for the rest of his arbitration years, as long as we have team control, that is totally fine to me. It's a little bit underwhelming as a eighth overall pick, but I do think I really believe in an uptick in defense when he eventually moves to third base. I don't see a world where that doesn't happen relatively soon. I think that we've been kind of waiting to talk about Royce Lewis as being done in Minnesota because it probably doesn't happen till the end of the year no matter what. But at this point, it's really tough to see him coming back after this season, whether he even gets tendered a contract or he's a trade to a fresh scenery type of guy. I really struggle to see a world where Brooks Lee isn't at the most our everyday third baseman by next year. And I think that's something he's just a lot more suited for.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, he's outplayed Royce Lewis for sure. And Royce also has a lot less team control. The Twins still have 4 more years of Brooks Lee after the season. They have more incentive to keep him around as well because he does have the positional flexibility to play up the middle. And so, even if the Twins do develop some other shortstop and other infield options, let's say Kalen Culpepper and Merrick Houston come up and they're your new left side of the infield combo, you could always keep Brooks Lee around to be a super utility man in the infield, which is a role he's pretty well suited for. And let's talk about Royce Lewis a little bit because man, has he been bad. And I don't think he's helping his case in the media at all. I don't know if you saw his quotes recently, but he did a story with Dan Hayes of The Athletic where he talked about always coming to the ballpark and thinking, maybe this team doesn't want me here anymore. Maybe they're just waiting for me to fail. There's always a player that's coming to take my job next. And my initial thought reading those quotes was, man, waiting for you to you've done nothing but fail for 2.5 years. What are we talking about, buddy? I mean, and like you mentioned, we're at a point where after the season, we only have 2 more years of control with Royce Lewis. He'll probably be making 4.5 million next year. He hasn't been good in his last 800 plate appearances. At what point do the Twins just say, "Yeah, we're out of the Royce Lewis business. We can go ahead and non-tender him"?
It just absolutely kills me that he feels this pressure creeping over him that people want him to fail because Minnesota is such a quiet market. There's no pressure to perform here relative to pretty much anywhere else in the league. Like, man, if you're that under the microscope here in Minnesota, if that's how you feel, imagine playing for a team like the Yankees or the Mets, bud. Like, he wouldn't even be able to suit up for them. That gives me the icks a lot. This is a fan base and honestly media like city that was able to really rally around a guy like Williams Astudillo, who realistically was never contributing anything to the roster, but still became an all-time Twins icon. And I get there was no expectations for him, so the idea of him failing didn't really exist. But like, it's so soft to be coming at whoever he is with that statement because I don't even really know who he's talking about when he says they want to see me fail. If he even means the fans, the front office, I don't know who he thinks is waiting for him to fail, but we would all love to see him turn it around.
Yeah, also, I mean, if he's talking about the front office, they hired a new manager, and that manager flew out the same week to meet him 1,000 miles away in a different state. So, I mean, the organization's really bending over backwards to make sure that you feel valued and prepared as a player. And it's pretty obvious that they have a lot of eggs in the Royce Lewis basket where they really have been counting on him to be a central part of this offense for a few years now. And if he's seeing all that and then being like, man, they just want me to fail. It's like, big dog, they keep playing you and you've been terrible. Like, if they wanted you to fail, they would have in 2024 said, this guy sucks, minors. Or they in 2025 at literally any point would have optioned him. Or this year, when he's underperformed for a third straight year, they would DFA him. But instead, they haven't. They've kept playing him pretty regularly. He's like, man, they just want me to fail. You're actively failing. There's no want here. You just suck.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting better treatment than Matt Waller, and I don't know that A, Matt Waller has been any worse this year, and B, he certainly has not been nearly the headache on the team that Royce Lewis has. It's just, it's frustrating. Obviously, the Twins are kind of stuck in this situation they've created for themselves now where you have to at least give him the rest of this year because you get no value out of DFAing him. You probably don't have a trade market for him at this point, and non-tendering him this offseason would make a lot of sense, but there's no reason for them to pull the plug at any point before the end of this year so that they could try to at least juice some value out of him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. At this point, the Twins' hands are kind of tied. They don't necessarily have a better third base option immediately. I think at some point this season, we'll probably see Kalen Culpepper come up, at which point he's going to play shortstop. Brooks Lee maybe slides over to third. But even still, Royce Lewis probably will find his way into the lineup somewhat regularly for the rest of the year, especially against left-handed pitching. Because I would imagine what happens against lefties with Culpepper up is Lewis plays third, Lee moves to second, and then you can play Luke Keeschel in the outfield. But yeah, I mean it's rough. I'm ready to be out of the Royce Lewis industry. I just don't have a whole lot of faith in him. I'm getting really tired of his personality and honestly his constant complaining to the media. And he's just not worth the headache for a player who hasn't been very good for a few years. You have to always kind of game plan for some absence from him because, it's obviously not his fault, but he is injured frequently. And when he's not injured, he's underperformed for 3 years. And so at that point, when a player's both a roster headache, they also have a personality that can be hard to manage, and they're not performing even in the best of circumstances. It's just not a player that's worth rostering to me, and I really hope the Twins feel the same way this offseason.
Yeah, that's very well put. I'm right there with you. If we're going down the path for this week of just bashing on hitters though and our offense in general, there are two more suspects I want to bring up because we frankly don't talk about them much because they really aren't big parts of the Twins' plan. But man, Josh Bell and Victor Caratini have both been miserable signings for the Twins at this point. You want to talk about a guy who is playing worse than Royce Lewis? Victor Caratini and his 529 OPS. Josh Bell had at one point, I think he was over 1.0 WAR to start the year. He was that hot. And he's already played his way back down to being negative .6 WAR for this Twins team. He now sits at a 218, 291, 324 slash line that gets him to 615. He's barely a 600 OPS hitter, and he's our everyday first baseman.
Yeah, I will say I have faith in Josh Bell bouncing back, and it's not the most empirical faith. Like, it's not very stats driven, but just anecdotally, Josh Bell's one of these players where he will look like the worst player in baseball for 2 months, and then he will carry an offense for 4 months. We've seen in the past Josh Bell be, on a 1 year deal somewhere, and he looks terrible for the full first half. And then a contending team will trade for him at the deadline just because they know he can be streaky, and then he goes on a tear in the second half. And so I have some faith that he'll turn it around. I will say he has gotten a little bit unlucky. His expected numbers are quite a bit better than his actual numbers so far. And so I think he can turn around and at least be an average big league hitter. But yeah, it's been rough so far. Caratini, his struggles are a little bit more under the microscope just because they've had to play him at first base so much with wanting to avoid playing Josh Bell there. Um, yeah, I mean, if he was just in a backup catcher role, we'd be saying, well, this is a pretty cheap backup catcher, and he's just scuffling to start the year. But for a guy who was your only multi year signing in free agency, by far your biggest expenditure in free agency, and you're asking him not only to catch, but also play first base against all left handed pitchers, it's probably a situation he was ill equipped for, and we're just seeing that not work out.
Yeah, I think the really tough part with Caratini especially is we had already made the Alex Jackson move this offseason, and if you wanted a catcher to come in here and just play like a 20% side of an 80-20 platoon split with Ryan Jeffers and give you a 550 OPS and passable defense, you could have had Alex Jackson at 1.3 million, and they did instead of having Victor Caratini. And then all you have to do to replace the first baseman production is not DFA Eric Wegman and DFA James Outman instead, who has only been pretty much a pinch runner and defensive replacement this entire season anyways, and very could have easily been DFA'd. And you get all of the same production that you have been getting for $7 million this year out of what, like 1.5 it would have been, two tops, and you would have been able to at least spend another 5 million on the bullpen or something.
Yeah, I will say Alex Jackson, the major league track record is not nearly as good as Victor Caratini's, especially with the bat. And Alex Jackson, even this year in AAA, he he has a 506 slugging percentage, so he's still hitting for extra bases, but a 298 on base, 234 batting average. He's striking out a 31% rate. He is a better defender than Caratini for sure, much stronger arm behind the plate. And I think so far, at least, you could argue, the negative .5 WAR Victor Caratini, Alex Jackson absolutely could have done that. But still, I think overall, the rest of the season and even next season, I would bet on Caratini being the better player. But it's a very fair point to bring up. You know, you only have a pretty small total pie to work with. If you're the Twins and talking about their payroll, is it worth taking, 7%, 8% of that chunk and giving it to Victor Caratini to be your backup catcher? Probably not the allocation of assets that I would have chosen, especially when they had Ryan Jeffers coming into the year. But I mean, it was still a reasonable deal for Caratini. I still think he's going to bounce back and it'll be fine. And with a normal roster and a normal year, we wouldn't blink at giving $6 million a year to a backup catcher with a decent track record. And so I think we're just viewing it much more now, because instead of that $6 million being Cal Farmer, who plays twice a week and is kind of an afterthought on the roster, it's a core piece that's being asked to do way more than he's ever been asked to do before in his career.
I do kind of feel like it's also a victim of the processes that got us there, because I feel like this move was really set up and dictated by their decision to go after Josh Bell, when presumably they knew when they were signing Josh Bell, they did not want him to play first base and they were going to need to still find somebody who could play a pseudo first base for them. I think if you skip out on the Josh Bell signing and you just like sign Paul Goldschmidt for the same money, even maybe a little bit less, we're not in the situation with either of these guys to begin with. But ultimately, yeah, like I said, we haven't really been talking about them because for Josh Bell, I'd be shocked if we even have him over the full season, and I don't really see Victor Caratini being an extension candidate at the end of his contract.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think Victor Caratini was ever going to be an extension candidate. I mean, currently the Twins, they have him for this year and next year. He's going to turn 33 in August, so he'll be 34 by the end of his Twins deal. For a catcher, that's, I mean, unlikely that he's really much of anything by the end of next year. The aging curve for catchers tends to be really steep, and honestly, most catchers have already fallen off by now, and there's definitely some risk that Victor Caratini has just fallen off of the age cliff. But I mean, we're gonna have to ride that roller coaster one way or another. We're locked in at this point. Yeah, I think this also leads into some long-term questions of the catcher position. We've talked about Ryan Jeffers being a free agent at the end of this year. It's probably very unlikely that the Twins bring him back. Victor Caratini is around for another season, but he's an aging catcher who's probably best equipped to be a backup. He's always been a backup, and I doubt the Twins view him as much more than that at this stage of his career. Alex Jackson, honestly, it sounded like the Twins were trying to give away to anyone who would pay his contract at the end of spring training. They found no takers. He's probably just going to be a non-tender in the offseason. And so you look at this Twins team and you say, they have one catching option for next year that we don't love. There's no true starter. And down on the farm, they do have
Eduardo Tait.
They do have Eduardo Tait, the centerpiece of the John Duran trade. I don't know why I always forget Eduardo Tait's name. But they do have Tait. He's still, teenage catcher in high A. He's a ways away. Definitely not a guy that we're counting on the next couple of seasons. But I think a really interesting option for the Twins and someone who could probably be on the same Tait trajectory, maybe get to the majors a little bit quicker, is a catcher for Georgia Tech currently, and that is Vaughn Lackey. He's having a big season in college. The Twins, of course, hold the number 3 overall pick in the draft this summer and have been widely mocked to Lackey throughout the process. And I think, you definitely, especially in baseball, you never draft for need. It's best player available. It's whoever you think you can develop into the best big league player. But I think it's interesting, at least, that the Twins have a premier catching prospect, if a little bit further from the big leagues. They have potentially the option to draft a guy like Vaughn Lackey in the first round, add another potential star catching option. And I think at that point, I become a lot less concerned about the Twins' long-term plans at catcher, knowing that they have a couple of guys who have the opportunity to really hold down a very important position for the next, half decade to decade.
I'm sorry, I just cannot get over this dude's name. It's spelled VAHN, which makes him like very German, but Von Lackey just sounds like the most generic evil henchman in any like action movie ever. I don't know why. I'm gonna kick out of this guy's name.
Dude, Von
Anyways,
Lackey too, sneaky speed. He can kind of run, which for a catcher is interesting. He has a good arm. He can really swing it. I mean, while we're talking about the draft, and I definitely don't want to make me out to be some sort of draft hawk, someone who knows all of these college players. But from my understanding, there's a real clear top 3 or 4 picks in this draft. I think, tier 1 is obviously going to be Rock Chalowski. I think he's universally thought to be the 101, but there is some chatter that the White Sox could pass on Chalowski, go for an underslot guy. Number 2 is probably going to be Grady Emerson. He's the toolsiest, highest upside player. He's a high school shortstop, but he's a guy who has a chance to stick it short. He has all the tools. He could be a really great player. And then we have the aforementioned Lackey, and then we have a guy from UC Santa Barbara. I know his last name's Flora, but I'm forgetting the first name. But he's a Jackson Flora. He's a power pitcher. He's a big frame, good changeup, big fastball. Has a chance to be a frontline starter. And so there's a couple of big options. The Twins sitting at pick 3 have a really good chance to either take, a guy like Lackey or Flora, or maybe reach on a guy like Justin LeBron on an underslot deal. There's also the chance that, if the White Sox or if the Rays get a little bit creative above them, they could get a Chalowski or Emerson. So this has been a really brief breakdown of the draft, but I think the Twins have some good options are in a pretty good position to get some value out of it, at least in the first round.
yeah, I think the big thing for me that supports the idea of taking Von Lackey at 3 is that the Twins have historically been pretty scared of high school talent. It's not something that they've typically steered into. I know Royce Lewis was right out of high school when we took him first overall. But outside of that, I am actually kind of struggling to think about our last first round pick that was right out of high school.
Chase Petty.
Oh yeah, I guess Chase Petty. He was what, a competitive balance pick, so like
No,
end of
he
first.
was our conventional first round pick.
Okay. But anyways, I do feel like they've definitely been trending towards more of a college player. They just like the more polished guys that you're going to be a little more confident on projecting, and I don't hate that strategy at all. The other thing I feel like I've noticed some focus on a lot is they do like hitting over pitching. I think the Twins really love more of the reject pitchers that you get in the second and third round, guys who are either really tall and don't fit that profile. I mean, he wasn't this high of a pick, but like the Bailey Ober types, guys that you think you're going to build up into power pitchers, or your injury laden guys that you think are going to stay healthy and get it right. Your Connor Prelips, your who's the Riley Quick is the guy we just got out of Bama, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So overall, I just feel like the Twins prefer pretty much the safest possible pick in the first round. It's been their trend. It's a college hitter, and that would be right up their alley with not only the best player available, but it does help that it's a bit of a need in the organization.
Yeah, I will say, I think if Emerson makes it to 3, there's no shot the Twins pass on him just because he's pretty clearly the highest upside player in this draft. He's a guy that scouts love. It's funny, I've read multiple scouting reports from different like prospect write ups where people have said, yeah, like the only bad thing I can get a scout to say about him is, well, he's not Bobby Witt, because that's been the most common comp for him because he does everything really well in the field, but he just doesn't have that like highest tier of tools that Witt does. But he's still a super toolsy player, a guy that has a lot of upside, could be a well rounded star in the big leagues. I think it really says something when scouts are like, yeah, he's really good, but he's not Bobby Witt. It's like, that's all that you can say as a negative. This 8 to 10 WAR player, absolute monster for the Royals. Okay, yeah, I'll take a 5 WAR version of that. Sure, give me the diet Bobby Witt. That works for me. And not saying that we know that this 18-year-old is going to turn into that, but if that's what the scouts are saying, I don't think the Twins would pass on that at 3.
Do you think there's any world where Tom Polad, in his quest to be better now, is influential enough to like push for a college player in the draft over a high school player? This might just be a little tinfoil hatty, but like I don't really see the guy who's been overly eager to turn things around and change the perception of this team being excited about taking an 18-year-old out of Texas that you're not going to see for 4 years.
They call that the old Art Moreno trick.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, there's some overbearing owners that would definitely do that. I really hope that, Tom Pollad's not going to be one of those, but it could happen. Although, my point would be, even the Angels have spent money recently and they've invested in their major league team. They're just really bad at it and don't really have an understanding of what to invest in. And then also gave $35 million a year to a guy who did not want to play baseball and was open about his dislike of the sport. So, I mean, at least they were trying to be competitive and they're backing it up with their money. If you're the Twins or if you're Jeremy Zoll and you're talking to Tom Pollad and he's saying, "No, we got to draft a college kid. Like we really got to win now." It's a lot easier to just be like, "Hey, man, instead of screwing up our draft, why don't you just spend $20 million on a functional bullpen? That'd be pretty cool." But
Yeah.
so far, it looks like they've failed in those endeavors.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that Derek Falvey leaving the front office was kind of a sign that the Polads aren't necessarily going to take a lot of pushback. Not to say that it wasn't already one foot out the door type scenario with Falvey, but as much as they don't really have any room to be criticizing the way the team is being built, I also don't think that anybody in that front office really has the room or power to push back at the Polads. But in the end, I don't really see it being that big of an issue. One other guy I did want to talk about draft wise was Jacob Lombard out of Miami. mainly because I recognize the name. His dad played in the MLB, and his older brother's, I believe, a top 50-ish overall prospect for the Yankees right now.
Yeah, George Lombard Jr. Yep.
Yep. And by all accounts, scouts up and down seem to agree that they think Jacob Lombard is even better than George Lombard Jr. was in high school and projects even more highly. And that just is kind of interesting to me because, I mean, again, obviously everybody's career, their growth, or everything is going to be independent of each other. But you've seen the track record of history, not only with his dad, but with his brother. And if by all accounts you think he's better than his brother, you think you're really just walking into a top 50 asset immediately.
Yeah, I will say he's a little bit different than his brother, and honestly, the downsides to Jacob Lombard is kind of similar to what we've talked about with Justin LeBron, and that they're both, good athletes. Especially LeBron, we think is going to stick at shortstop. They're toolsy. They have some pop, but both of them have a lot of swing and miss, and I think it's even more concerning with Jacob Lombard just because his swing and miss has come against high school arms. It hasn't come even against premium SEC talent. And so he's really struggled to make contact consistently on the high school circuit showcase. And you would imagine that when he sees pro level arms, that gets even worse. We've seen time and time again really toolsy high school prospects who teams draft as kind of projects. They will think, man, we can get this guy to make more contact. He can be a 30-30 guy, he can be a star. And then they just never really hit in the minors. And I think that would be my concern with taking Jacob Lombard, especially given the Twins. I mean, true lack of ability to develop position players, taking a really raw high school talent that has swing and miss concerns at number 3 overall. I feel like that would be a recipe for disaster for this team.
Yeah, I like I said earlier, don't really think it fits the mold of the player they like to go after. And yeah, I don't think that he really asserts himself enough over some of these college guys to be worth it. But it's definitely a name that I think is within the Twins' range of guys to look at. Because outside of, I do agree with the top two being Chalowski and
Emerson. Emerson, by the way, also a Bloodlines guy. He's the younger brother of Colt Emerson.
Colt Emerson, the shortstop coming up for the Mariners. Yep. Yeah, yeah. I had to put that one together for a second. Yeah, I mean, they clearly seem to be the top two in the draft, but it does kind of feel like there's another inner-ish circle with Von Lackey, the Santa Barbara pitcher, and Lombard that they kind of seem to be in their own tier as well. So I think that the Twins could really be in the mix for any of them.
Yeah, and again, that's still a couple months away. I mean, a lot of baseball fans don't even care about the draft at all because these players take so long to make it to the big leagues. But we're nerds and we love this stuff. So we're going to tell you all about it, even though you may or may not care.
We'll do the boots on the ground work for you so that you can look like a nerd, even if you probably don't want to.
Yeah, otherwise, I mean, it's just another week business as usual for this Twins team. I think we've continued to see the flaws that we knew were here all along. They've gotten some nice wins. They've had some really ugly losses. I think the offense has been better than expected, but still flawed, and we would expect them to potentially regress from where they've been at. The pitching side looks like a absolute hot mess right now. We don't really know what's going on. It's hard to make heads or tails of it. About the only thing we can say about this pitching staff is Joe Ryan is good, and everything else is a big old question mark. And I think the one last thing that we haven't really touched on this week has been the defense. And I think they've cleaned it up a little bit. Just watching over the last couple weeks, it's looked better, but it was a low bar to clear. And this Twins team right now, let me get it pulled up, but they are 28th in defensive runs saved, 23rd in outs above average, and 24th in fielding run value. So they've been pretty clearly a very bad defense, and that's even with better than expected production from Trevor Larnach with the glove, which is not something that we expected coming into the year. So, Eric, how are we feeling about this defense, and do we think that there's a path forward for this group improving?
I think the most disappointing part is it kind of just feels like a bit of a failure on our end that we're bringing up all of these young pitchers and expecting, not maybe expecting them to perform well, but needing them to perform well to be a good team. And then we're putting out that type of defense behind them. It it does remain frustrating. I will say there's enough highlight plays that I think are able to keep the highlight reel rolling that we'll never get too disgruntled. I mean, Brooks Lee had a hell of a play to close out the game against Cleveland on Saturday. And I think that's really where we are going to stick because I don't believe in any of these guys really becoming better defenders. I'm stunned that Trevor Larnach has improved himself to even be a above league average defender out in left. I think it's a little interesting that we've definitely seen a lot less of Matt Wallner in right field than we expected, and that doesn't really seem to have any sort of impact on our defense. Part of that's just because your right fielder is naturally one of your least impactful defenders in the game, but also because I just don't think that any of the guys who are playing out there instead of him are all that much better. So I am unsurprised with where this defense is at, but I guess okay with it still. Mainly that's just because we've been building up to this.
Yeah, I will say Jeffers has still looked good behind the plate. Buxton has continued to be a positive defender in center field even as he ages. Trevor Larnach's looked decent in left in the early going. I think Luke Keeschel hasn't been a disaster at second. He's looked okay. Yeah, the arm is still not great, but he's rangy and he's athletic. And so, three of your four up the middle positions look decent to above average. And you have a corner guy in left who you feel like can be probably like an average-ish defender. And then outside of that, if you let's say bring up Kalen Culpepper and he can be an average shortstop, and I think there's hope that he can be a little bit more. But let's say first year as a rookie, he's an average defensive shortstop. You move Brooks Lee down the defensive spectrum to third. Let's say he improves a little bit and he's a bit below average or an average third baseman. That alone makes this infield defense a lot better. And then you're really just one of these left-handed hitting corner outfielders coming up and playing right field away from a pretty solid defense where you have an Erod or Jenkins or whoever playing right field instead of Matt Wallner. And now you look around and you say, we have two positive defenders in the outfield and one guy who's at least not a negative. We have a group of infield defenders that we think are all capable. And we feel a lot better about this defense because, I mean, right now it's rough, but at least the saving grace is that a lot of these prospects that are coming up have good gloves.
Yeah, maybe I'm just a little scarred by some of the recent Twins developees. I mean, Royce Lewis, I think, has so much of an injury factor going into the way his defense has declined. But this guy was at one point a 5 tool prospect, with defense being one of his biggest tools. I think at the time we maybe even knew that he wasn't going to stick at shortstop, but we felt range wise that he would be an elite defender at third base. And I think he's just lost a lot of that with his injuries. Brooks Lee was touted as a glove first shortstop. I felt like when we drafted him, I see.
I would not say he was a glove first prospect. The whole idea with Brooks Lee is this guy's going to hit and we'll figure out where he plays later.
There's maybe a bit of that, but either way, he certainly was billed as a plus defender at the draft. Maybe not, again, maybe not staying at shortstop, and maybe if he did get moved out to third base, I do think he could build himself back into a plus defender. But there's just been a lot of recent developees that have not been putting out great defense. Guys that weren't expected to be good defenders haven't been. in Matt Wallner, and up until this year, Trevor Larnach, guys that were supposed to be good defenders, largely haven't been. And it's just, it's unsurprising that we keep ending up at this point, I guess.
Yeah, I will say the one thing the Twins have done a really good job at, and this is what makes me excited about, especially Eduardo Tayit, being how young he is, but also potentially Von Lackey if the Twins were to draft him, is they've done a really good job at developing catcher defense. We saw that with Mitch Garver back in the day, and then more recently with Ryan Jeffers. Jeffers was a second round pick, not because people didn't believe in his bat. He was a monster player in college, but because they thought he was going to be a right handed hitting first base DH guy, because there's no way this guy was going to be able to stick at catcher. And the Twins have turned him into not only a passable defender, but honestly an average or maybe a little bit above average defender behind the plate. The arm is still weak, but he's at least a decent receiver. He can block well enough that it's not going to kill you. And I think that's something that's been valuable. But again, that's one position on the field. And it's definitely a fair point to bring up all the other shortcomings the Twins have had in various areas of development across the position player side.
I will say though, shout out to Ryan Jeffers. I heard the update on the broadcast today. He does still lead the league in strike calls or ball calls overturned into strikes. And I am still a firm believer that challenges are going to be more valuable as a volume stat rather than a rate stat. A lot of people are like, oh my God, look at this catcher. He's like 10 for 12 this year. And I'm like, yeah, but he could have stolen another 20 strikes for your team, and you would probably not have even ran out of challenges in most of those games because we've seen teams be pretty good at successfully conserving those challenges. But to me, I think Ryan Jeffers leading the league in calls overturned is by far the most valuable defensive stat that he could be posting right now.
Yeah. So we are big Ryan Jeffers fans. It sucks that we're probably coming to the end of his tenure, but we'll enjoy it while we have him, and hopefully we'll have some replacements on the way.
After a week of play that largely felt wrong, even as it was going right, hopefully the Twins will have a little bit of an easier week ahead of themselves or flipping over to the National League for a little bit. First, we have a day off Monday, which will be really nice as we try to piece together the order of this rotation again. Another day off for everybody is going to do wonders. But then we get three against the Marlins, who I'll give them have been sneaky decent this year, but if the Twins are ever going to get hot, it's going to be in a stretch like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, when you play in the AL Central, it's not like you have a whole lot of rough stretches. Usually you have at least one division opponent where you're like, this team's not any good. We should get hot. Whether or not the Twins have the ability to do that, open question.
Yeah, I mean every other team in the AL Central certainly looks at us in that way, but I think it's also fair for us to see some of that in a lot of them. In the end, I think we're going to be sitting right where we have been for most of the season, and that is good enough for me, I guess. Hopefully, it's good enough for you guys. We'll see in time. For now, you can catch us on Spotify, on YouTube, on Apple, on Amazon, anywhere you get your podcasts. Me and Matt are on Twitter, both the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. And individually, you're getting a lot more of our day to day thoughts, commentaries on the game as it's happening. So if you want any more of that, make sure to check us out on Twitter. And until next week, thank you for listening.